Welcome to Conversations with Kate. I'm your host, Kate Jagedi, and today I am thrilled to be joined by the fascinating Joe Cetrone. So before we get into the conversation proper, firstly, Joe, I have to say thank you for honoring my invitation and for being on the program.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you, and of course, since the virus and everything that's going on, to talk to anybody outside of my home right now is a breath of fresh air. So thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. And also, just for the audience, I'm going to say a little bit about you, read from your website, just a snippet from your website. I will, of course, link the details to your website in the description box under the video. So for those of you who don't know Joe, and perhaps you've not watched Paranormal TV, and I'm going to say something about that in a minute, but Joe Cetrone is an author. He's a researcher and a musician. He has appeared on the television programs Paranormal Survivors and Haunted Case Files. Joe also founded S.O.U.L, which is spiritual outreach. We're going to talk about that in the conversation, which is committed to assisting those who are struggling with unexplained phenomena. But I also want to read from your website, Joe. It says that Joe was born in the historical Federal Hill neighborhood of Providence, Rhode Island. A frighteningly ghostly encounter at an impressionable young age set Joe on a quest for the truth, one that would alter and inform his life's path. His passion to investigate the unseen realm accelerated following a bizarre conversation with his father only days prior to his death. He studied under Keith Johnson, formerly of TAPS, and the Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters, and learned the scientific elements to research. From there, Joe's career elevated to a series of memorable accomplishments. So, Joe, hopefully we'll be able to talk about some of those accomplishments throughout the course of this conversation. But what I want to start with, I think would be really interesting, is just if you can give a bit of background about your childhood in Rhode Island. I love the fact that it has this kind of spooky vibe to it. So you can just tell us a bit about how that helped to shape your spiritual interest.
So I was born in Providence, Rhode Island. So, being part of the city, went to school like everybody else and, did all normal things. It was, the best that I could possibly do living in the city. I also went to Catholic school. So my parents had put me in the Catholic school. I was kind of around that whole religious theme, especially as an Italian growing up in Federal Hill. Church was a must. So what's really weird about everything is while most kids were playing with their Matchbox cars and doing stuff like that and, drawing and having fun and going outside, I always had this link to an unseen realm. I don't know if it was going to church a lot. The one thing that intrigued me the most is when I sat in church and I looked at all the statues and I watched the priest up there, doing his sermon. And I looked at these statues and I always say to myself, there has to be something more to the unseen realm than these statues. These lifeless statues, to me, I couldn't conceive religion versus a relationship or a spiritual understanding of who God might be. So that is always, when people say, have you always believed in the supernatural? Have you always believed in God when you were younger? And the answer is yes. For some reason, I always had that calling in my mind that, listen, I know there's something out there. I can't see it. I can't touch it, but I can definitely feel it. So at that point in time, it was the catalyst of my whole career, I believe, was on Christmas Eve. I was 6 years old. It was Christmas Eve. I remember going to bed, like all kids are. I get the little cup out there with the cookies and, waiting for Santa. And my mom's like, okay, go to bed. So about 4:30 in the morning. So now we go to Christmas Day. 4:30 in the morning, all of a sudden, I'm laying in bed and I felt this presence. And I was stricken with fear. I was filled with fear. And the first instinct as a child was me to hide. So I remember I'm in bed, I'm tossing and turning, and I feel this presence. I know somebody's there. I bury my head under the pillows. I put the blankets over me, and I'm like, what was that? I peek through and I see an apparition standing there. And what I did, I buried my head again, and I remember praying, and I didn't have too much depth of prayer. So it was like, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, please God, make it go away, make it go away. I looked and it was still there. Please God, make it go away, make it go away. And I felt a release, and that tension and that fear and that coldness left the room. And it was funny because I really believe that I suppressed that event, because it wasn't until maybe 10 or 15 years later where that popped back into my mind again. And I was like, oh yeah, you know something? That did happen. And it's like all those emotions came back, and I'm like, what was that? Who was that? Was it an angel? Was it a spirit? Was it inhuman? I mean, it was a frightening experience, but it also affirmed what I believed in my heart, even as a child, that there is something that we can't see, a world that runs parallel to ours. And that is what led to an onslaught of so many supernatural encounters.
That's absolutely fascinating. And I remember as a child, myself having sort of peculiar sort of experiences that you can't quite get your head around. And they're absolutely terrifying. How was it for you in terms of, was this something you were able to tell your parents about? Were you able to share with them? Because I understand that Catholics don't really believe in ghosts. Is that correct? Or am I wrong about that?
No, you're absolutely right. And it's funny because even when I talk to like family members now who are strong Catholics, they're like, the first thing they say is, oh, you believe in that stuff? You believe in ghosts? And I try to be very respectful, and I say, let me ask you a question. When you're praying and you talk about the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit, what does that mean to you? And they'd be like, well, I mean, that's God. I mean, that's the Holy Spirit. Okay, so I said, freeze, time out. You just says Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit. I said, well, what do you think you are? What do you think we are? What do you think God is? God is a spirit. We are spirits. And they like, I never thought of it that way. And then I started to realize it's not that it's their fault. It's they're programmed to know one thing, repetitiously, religiously, faithfully. They go to church every Sunday. They watch, listen to the priest's sermons. They see the statues in the church. But I don't think they, stop to realize that it's all connected together. The spirit realm means that spirits exist, and you are a spirit. I always say one day when your soul leaves your body, you will be part of that spirit world, and then maybe then you'll get that epiphany.
That's fantastic. I know there's a lot of people, certainly I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a perfect answer for anybody who's kind of struggling with how do I answer, how do I, rebut those kinds of people who disagree with what I believe. Yeah, that's a wonderful way to answer it. So I want to go back to your parents for a second, because
Sure.
I've been lucky enough to have some discussion with you about your childhood, and they themselves have had some really fascinating experiences. We'll come back to this if necessary, but for now, if you could just tell me a bit about this introduction to the darker side of the spirit world. And before you answer, Joe, I want to say that, when we're talking about spirit and consciousness and all of that, we don't really tend to touch on the darker side of things. So could you just share a bit about that experience and when that happened in your life?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that back up, because you asked earlier, you says, did you tell your parents about the experience that you had? And the answer is no, I never did say anything. Number one, it did scare me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what their reactions would be. But alongside of that experience that happened to me, my parents was also friends with somebody who was into, we call it the dark arts. She was a witch that practiced black magic. So for her to do seances, summoning spirits, Ouija boards, tarot cards, and all the divination tools, not to say all that the tools themselves maybe aren't per se evil, but the intent that we use them sometimes are, and the energy that we put into those oracles can make a difference. This person really took pride into their belief system. And there was a lot of supernatural stuff that was going on with them. I would probably fast forward maybe a month after Christmas. We had gone to that person's house. And I remember my parents were downstairs, and they says, okay, listen, why don't you go upstairs, go to sleep. We'll get you up when it's time to leave, and then we'll go. So, of course, nonchalantly, I go upstairs and I go to bed. And I woke up probably maybe an hour, 2 hours after that. And I started hearing noises downstairs. And it sounded like people were talking and maybe chanting. And I don't remember it too much. It wasn't until years later that my parents kind of filled in the codes for me and explained what was going on. But for me at that age, I was scared. I was scared to be in that room. Felt that same type of presence, that same fear that came over me. And I'm like, I don't want to be here. So I kind of walked downstairs. And as I was walking down there were a group of people sitting at the table, and they were chanting, they were summoning something. And I remember, years later when my mother had told me that she was scared that night that I went down there because she thought something was going to happen to me. And she even asked this person, is my son going to be harmed? And she said to her, she says, no, he's protected. So I believe that they were doing some sort of seance, summoning something, because it wasn't until, like I said, once again, years later, where my father had said, he remembers being in that house and seeing shadows on the wall. And he'd see, the outside appearance of what looked like human beings, but they were shadows, and they would walk across the wall. So at that point, I was kind of in a little bit of a conundrum. I didn't want to say anything to my parents of what was happening to me. Obviously, I knew something else was going on, darker and deeper. And I kind of just, people talk about, being traumatized and kind of like forgetting their past. And how do you forget certain memories? I don't know if you forget them so much, but you shelve them in the back of your mind that you hope to never remember them. And then as you get older, you start to weed through those files in your mind, and you're like, hey, I remember when that happened, and what was that? And that's how it went down. I mean, it really did. And come to find out, this person was into some dark, heavy stuff. My parents realized what was going on and said, it's time that we need to cut ties with this person. We're going to have to do this in a diplomatic way, but I don't want my son being around there. Around them and around that house, because I would always say, I don't want to go to that house. I don't want to go. Please don't let me go there. They eventually stopped me from going there, cut ties with her. And that part of my life was okay. But then, of course, obviously, I ventured into even deeper stuff as I got older.
So that's really interesting because I know, from our discussion that, yes, your parents did separate from this person, but it seems as if there had been some kind of negative influence, even though you were said to be protected. Something did happen to you, because you described that there was something about that experience that shaped what happened to you next in life, the kind of challenges that you faced. Are you able to say a bit about that before we move on?
Sure, absolutely. So as I got a little bit older, we ended up moving. We left the city, went to the suburbs. So, of course, that was great to be in the suburbs. I mean, my backyard was a little alleyway with a barbed wire fence. So for me to go to the suburbs and have this big yard and grass, I mean, I was like amazed by it. It wasn't too long after we moved there that we were experiencing paranormal phenomena even then. It would be to the point that we'd be sitting there in the living room and we would hear footsteps, heavy pounding footsteps on the roof of the house, as if something was running across. They weren't animals. It wasn't squirrels or anything like that. These were loud footprints. I mean, so much that the chandelier that we had would shake and vibrate. And this went on for a while. And even the dog that we had at the time, she would start to growl. You would see that, the hair in the back of her her neck and would just kind of pop right up, and she'd start growling, looking up at the ceiling. So I knew there was something going on. I don't know if, there was forces or entities that had attached to us from our experiences of that person that we were with, but it did carry over to me. And this was the craziest thing. Where most people would, kind of run away from it, I found myself running to it. There was something fascinating about, I don't want to say evil per se, but that darkness, somewhere in that darkness, I was intrigued. I was fascinated by it. I was seduced. I was seduced by maybe the paranormal experiences, maybe knowing that there was something else beyond this life that, I could start to affirm and confirm in my mind and say, this is real. Okay, if it is real, and these are powerful forces, number one, who are they? And number two, can I be friends with them? Because if I can be friends with them and have that behind me, then that even makes it better. So I started getting involved with reading books on the occult, getting into Ouija boards and trying to summon spirits myself and doing whatever I could as my young adolescent mind could comprehend. And then that wandered me down a even deeper path. So
it's fascinating. It's really interesting because there's one thing, no one who doesn't know me doesn't know this about me, that I have such a passion for the paranormal. I mean, that is my TV. That's my idea of heaven, Paranormal TV. And we're going to talk a bit about your own TV work in just a moment.
Sure.
But I love what you say about the dog. I mean, so much of your experience I can relate to. And our family dog, when we were young, she was always around me. And I was, of the children, always aware of something around.
Right.
Even I was very, very young, younger than you. I couldn't have explained anything. I just remember being afraid all the time, seeing shadows and hearing things and all that kind of experience. And our dog she wouldn't allow anyone near me. My mom had to come and sort of tell the dog, I want to put Catherine to bed, or I want to, she was so protective of me. So it's amazing how animals are sensitive to a lot that we're not sensitive to. But not to talk about that too much, Joe. I'm interested now in okay, so the way in which so many of us are familiar with this kind of thing, the occult, the dark arts, and things like that, and yet people find it difficult to believe in the kind of ideas that I talk about. For example, thought causation, or the power, the aspect of us that is spiritual. Why do you think that is? Why is it so easy to believe in things like the paranormal, but not to want to accept that there is, a Holy Spirit or God or whatever around us?
Great question. I've always found myself, even now, in the middle of two roads. So I've got the paranormal community, which I have a great respect for. The paranormal community will always deem me sometimes a little too godly. And the Christian community will deem me not godly enough. So I never could appease both sides. So I once I concluded that, I'm like, okay, all I can do is take my experiences, my beliefs, my opinions, because I don't claim to have all the answers. I can only confirm what I know to be true by the experiences that has happened to me. Other than that, it's just a speculation. I think it's easier when we watch these ghost shows and, we watch investigators go into houses with their flashlights and their cameras and they're using their scientific equipment, because you're not really seeing things, but you're watching everything kind of unfold. And we're intrigued by why they do those and how they do those things. And then to capture like an audio recording or a photo, it's almost like we separate and individualize paranormal and religion and faith. And I'm of the belief now more than ever that it's all connected to the same realm. I mean, everything is connected. It's how we interpret it. It's easier for you to say you believe in, well, I don't even know if this is a good analogy, but for you to be in the water and you to see fish, it's normal to see small little fish go by, maybe a turtle, maybe a crab, because you're seeing it, you're used to it. But the thoughts of seeing anything bigger than that, whether we're dealing with sharks or or large predators in the ocean, you kind of like, I know it's there, but I don't want to know it's there. And I believe it's the same thing. I believe we know evil exists. We see it in humanity. Unfortunately, I mean, there's good people out there, there's bad people out there. We see it, and it's hard to carry it over into the supernatural realm to say, is there a good spirit? Are there evil spirits? You know, when we think of evil spirits, you think of little devils with horns, and it's not like that at all. It's just a matter of how we perceive those energies out there that we can't see to be. But, however, that being said, I have always believed, and through experience and photos and the evidence, that there are inhuman spirits out there, whether good or bad, that can alter the course of our life by influence on us. I don't think that they can necessarily make us do things, but they can influence us. And we're kind of right in the middle of this large chess match between good and evil. And it just depends on what compartment we want to pull out and believe. And that's what we'll stick to. And that'll pretty well carry us throughout our life.
I love that. I actually think that's a wonderful analogy. It's clear to see and really easy to understand. And I do agree with you. It does boil down to our perception of these things, the way we interpret them and so on. So I mentioned before that I love Paranormal TV, and I can't have this conversation without talking to you about your television work. So for those who listening to this interview, Joe was the star of Paranormal Survivor and also Haunted Case Files. So could you just tell us a bit about your experience?
Absolutely. So Paranormal Survivor became, I was asked to do an episode of Paranormal Survivor when the team that I was working with had an investigation in Massachusetts, and this person had a child, and they claimed that their son was seeing spirits. So, of course, the first thing that I did back then was like, okay, it's not unheard of. I've done cases where children have seen things, and I myself have seen things. So I kind of took it as a higher priority case, went in there, did the investigation, took the pictures, interviewed the family, talked to the little child. I think he was four years old. So he got to explain certain things that I can get out of him. At the end of the night, we decided to do a little prayer. So we went out of the house and we started praying, went into the basement. And of course, we recorded everything. So recorded like maybe an hour's worth of recordings, just to see if we can hear anything. That very next day, I played it back. And during the prayer, there was a loud, inhuman growl that came over that recorder. Right around the time we were praying in the basement. I sent it to some experts, sent it to Keith Johnson, a couple of EVP experts out there, and they all said, listen, what you have is a 100% genuine EVP. It doesn't sound human. It's unlike anything that I've ever heard. So when I told Paranormal Survivor got in touch with me, they said, hey, listen, we found your name in the paranormal data bank. I want to ask you if you'd be willing to talk about some your experiences. I sent him the EVP. They loved it. Obviously, they loved it. There was TV to them. They're like, oh, if we can get an EVP of a growl, let's go. So I did that, did the episode, went over well. They called me back and says, listen, we like the way you talk. We like the way you word things. How would you like to be an expert to commentary episodes? I think it was 7 through 11. Ended up doing that. It went well, received really good. And then they were some of the same producers were doing Haunted Case Files. They says, hey, listen, we want to take cases from the investigators and from their perspective and how they felt was going on, at the time. Do you have anything? So I gave them 5 episodes, 5 cases that they turned into episodes, and the rest was pretty well, history. One of those episodes, however, was when I had done a case called the Sally House case, which is in Atchison, Kansas, really popular in the paranormal world. And that was right around the time that my son was attacked. And we can definitely talk about that if you want as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to make that the next question, because for someone like me, it's entertainment. I love it. I can sit there with a big bowl of popcorn. But here you are, real people, yourself, your son, having real experiences, and some of them actually quite potentially dangerous. So yes, please tell us about something, the incident that happened involving your son.
Okay, absolutely. So right around the time I was doing a bunch of cases. Now you have to understand that, and even for anybody who watches this and realizes it, what really did it for me was there was a part of me that's intrigued with the paranormal, even though I know it's real. I know it's dangerous from, the dark paths that I wandered down. There was a part of me that wanted to have a show of my own, because listen, the one thing I have to give credit to Jason and Grant of the Ghost Hunters is, they went there, they made a market, and everybody kind of wanted to be Taps. They wanted to go out there and get their shows and do all that stuff. And I wanted the same thing. And not paying attention to or even respecting that invisible realm, those traumatic experiences that happened to me, I kind of got caught up in what I call fame's deception. I wanted a show, and I was going to stop at nothing to go into any type of house that I could that was haunted, to pull evidence, to make great footage, to hopefully get my own show. At that time, I'm doing those cases. My mother takes my son, and at the time he was 9 years old, takes him to New York, and she goes to visit her mom. The house that they were staying in, somebody had committed suicide in that house probably 3 decades prior to that, so 30 years ago. They're in the room. My mother calls me and says, "You're never going to believe this, Joe, but your son was just attacked by something." She had one of the disposable cameras. She took pictures. He was scratched on his forehead, and he was tossed 5 feet across the room. And I remember talking to him, and I says, "Joey, are you okay? What happened?" He says, "Daddy, I don't know. I was just sitting there watching TV. I felt something heavy on my chest. I was scratched, and I was tossed right across the room." And that was a wake-up call for me, because I realized at that time, I had kind of clouded my judgment a little bit. I got lost into it. I was so worried about trying to get my own show and the media aspect of it, and maybe the financial blessings of it. It turned out to be a wake-up call that maybe I need to step back into myself and realize, why did I get involved with the supernatural from the beginning? It was never to make money. It was never to be a ghost hunter and go out there and expose things and make up stories. And, not saying that the ghost hunters make up stories so much, but, as actors out there that have to go out and do these shows, if we just try to make it by us going and do a case, it would be boring. So you have to have paranormal drama. You've got to have that oops or that aha moment or that noise, that what's that, and go to the commercial, and you've got to build imagery on the shows that you do. So I had to reflect back, why did I get involved with it? And then when I look at the road, from childhood to getting into some of those dark arts myself, and wandering down a path of substance abuse and addiction and all those things that I felt was a fallout from my childhood of the experiences that I dealt with. I think I carried it so much with me throughout the years, even into the paranormal, that I kind of teetered on both paths. And it was like, finally, it was that time to pick a side. What are you going to do? Do you want to show, or do you want to educate and you want to help people? And you've got to make that decision. So his attack and being involved with media and television as a whole kind of made me reevaluate those things.
That's absolutely fascinating. And here you are, Joe, you've had all of these incredible experiences, but they've come to form you, to move you along your path journey, and to move you into your purpose, which we're going to talk about in just in just a moment.
Sure.
So I just wanted to talk about, so no, let's go into that now, actually.
Oh,
So
sure.
I didn't mention before that you're an empath. So you're an empathic person. You're somebody who is aware. I believe you can pick up on what people are feeling or sensing. Is that correct? If you could just talk a bit about that, and then we'll talk about your work that you're doing now.
Absolutely. So I know a lot of people, like you said, they use the term empath or sensitives or, psychic empaths. I mean, there's so many different names that we term. I don't know if I would term myself as anything of that in a category. I guess I'd have to, but from childhood, I could always see things happen before they did. I always call it that my mind, especially as a young kid dealing with ADHD, then, my mind was like a Ferris wheel and it was constantly spinning. And then it came to a point where, as I get these images that would pop in my head, every so often, as my mind is spinning, it would land on a particular scene or an image, and I would stay there. Like, I remember one time, my mind's racing all over the place, and I see this fire truck, and I see sirens, and I see people running outside of the streets where I lived in the city. And not even 3 weeks after that, the exact incident happened. A friend of mine was on his bike. He got hit by a car right at the corner of our street. Fire trucks coming, people are running outside, and I'm like, wow, that's bizarre, because I kind of saw that, and of course, could that be luck at that point as a child? I don't know how to conceive it, but I started finishing sentences, as people were talking, they would sound, I'd be like, oh, I know what you meant. And then I would finish the sentence. They'd be like, how did you know that? And I don't know that. So I kind of took that with me, as maybe I was gifted to, see things and hear things and visions of maybe events. I never can control it. It never gave me times and dates. They were just brief images of events yet to come. And that's kind of how it all went down. And even today, it's the same type of thing. If I get a sense or a feeling, or I go into a home, I can feel things. Not so much see stuff like I did when I was a child. And of course, I believe that as we all get older, sometimes it's hard to maintain seeing or being susceptible, because I think when we're children, we're so young and we're so innocent and pure that we allow ourselves to see what we can't now. And as life evolves, as traumatic experiences happen, I think when we shut down, we shut that part down as well. And I think I did that for the most part. But I think today I can say that, like my dog, I think we have these built-in EMF detectors, that can detect when things are not right, or, that intuition that we use. I think some of us just know how to tap into it a little bit more than others.
I think that's absolutely wonderful. It's what I'm trying to do, or what I'm seeking to do with these conversations, is really expand people's perspectives and see that there are people that you see going about their daily business who have this whole other side to them. And stories like yours, I believe, Joe, are inspiring people to really accept that there is more to life than what we see. There's more to us than meets the eye, and that there's this whole wonderful, expansive, infinite side of us that really does deserve exploration. So I want to actually ask you, before I talk about S.O.U.L, why do you think that animals have these abilities that we as human beings don't seem to take advantage of, if you like?
That's a great question. I think, like children, animals are innocent. They're innocent beings. They really are. They've always said that animals have that sixth sense, that they can see things. I don't know. And here's another theory too. It's said that animals, when they see, and the fact that they can see things at night, they're nocturnal, some of them that can see, that when they look at things, they look at a scene or a picture inverted. almost kind of like black and white, or how what we would use is like a full spectrum camera, a camera that's been modified. And we use those in the paranormal world. I almost think that their vision and perception is kind of inverted. So what we can't see with our eyes physically, they can pull out with the vision that they can use, and they can see things. So they can draw those images out that we can't. So that's the scientific approach, I think, of what they feel with animals. While I do believe that, I also go into this. When we're children, we're very innocent. And until we come to that age of accountability, where we learn to lie, we learn to use our profanities and get, manipulate, and all those little emotions and senses that we do as human nature. I mean, that's just our carnal nature as human beings in this fleshly body. We're subject to those laws. We're subject to those sins, if you will, those sinful pleasures. And, I don't want to lie, but I can manipulate. And those emotions, I think, start to build a wall and separate what our carnal thoughts are and what is our spiritual our thoughts. So meaning, I believe that when we're innocent, we can operate into our spirit self, our spirit man, that person, that being within us, our soul. We can fully give that attention. As we start to go into life and trauma and death and sadness and heartache and all those emotions that we deal with, I think it covers that up. And it's like that. It's like a crud that just kind of stops us from seeing those things. I think animals and children have that innocence about them because they don't lie. They don't do those things that we do. They don't kill for pleasure. They kill because they have to eat. Everything is so innocently done and follow the protocol of the universe and life as a whole. I think that's why they can do that and see those things. And like I always tell everybody, we can spend hundreds of dollars, thousands even, on equipment, to see things, hear things, and whatever we need scientifically to prove an afterlife. But take an animal with you, one of the greatest EMF detectors around. Take your dog with you, and you'll probably be okay and save yourself a lot of money.
I agree with you 100%. That's terrific. So, Joe, now we've heard about your incredible story. I want to talk about S.O.U.L. If you could just tell the audience what S.O.U.L is and how it came to be. Okay,
absolutely. So if we were to recap with all that paranormal stuff that has gone on, there's always an underlying reason why we get involved with certain things in our life. And for me, emotionally, I struggled with abandonment and addictions in my life, and anger, and those I call those the pillars of destruction. That we can all relate to. Anger, abandonment, abuse. There are so many things that have set us on paths that we're not happy about. But, as much as we might do things that people think are awful, or we get an addiction to a particular substance abuse, whatever that vice may be, you have to always realize there's an underlying reason of why we do that. Why do we self-medicate ourselves? How do we deal with traumatic experiences? We close those doors. Sometimes we don't allow people in our lives. Sometimes it's hard to even have relationships because of those things that are happening. Yes. Can I say that some of it is induced by the supernatural or the paranormal? Absolutely. But then I also started to realize that maybe those emotions, maybe those feelings that we have can open those portals to other dimensions by the things that we experience in our life. I believe puts us susceptible to either allowing something positive or negative in our life. We can use that on a physical aspect, and I believe we can take that onto the spiritual aspect. And I said to myself, okay, listen, I can spend the rest of my life doing cases, Or I can stop and reflect and say, listen, what is causing that person to see those spirits? What are causing those hauntings? And then I started realizing it's not so much the houses themselves that are haunted, it's the individuals and the people that are haunted. And to go in there and get evidence of a spirit and say, okay, you know, Mrs. Johnson, we found a spirit in your house. Here it is. This is the audio. We can do a cleansing for you and have a nice day, basically. No, I started to realize we need to work with the people on an emotional level to help them understand why are these things happening. Go back into your mind. Like I told you at the beginning of the show, you know, these files that we download, you know, because life is a series of downloads. Some we file, some we put away, some we forget, some we never want to know anymore. I think sometimes if we can accent certain emotions of our life and our past, we can take that memory, open it up, and say, okay, I want to dissect it, I want to edit it, and I want to find out what happened in my life at that particular time that might have swayed me to go in a direction that I'm not proud of. If I can do that, then I'm getting to the core of that person. I'm going beyond physical. I'm going beyond, you know, what we see in homes of being haunted, and I'm going into the soul of it. And then I started saying, okay, soul, soul, soul. Why do I keep talking about soul? And then I related to my own life. You know, I started out as a seeker of universal light. And then I found that God was a spirit of unconditional love. And I'm like, spirit of unconditional love, soul, that's it. So, so now I have made it my mission to help people deal with the emotional and traumatic experiences of the paranormal. And even, you know, when we watch shows ourselves, like even yourself, if you watch the Travel Channel, Destination America, things like that, when you watch people being interviewed, you can almost see on some of them a sadness, a brokenness to them, you know? And I say to myself, okay, you told this person's story well. You made a great, you know, documentary of it. You know, you kind of reproduced everything's happening. It made for great TV. But what about those people? What happens to them after? Are they still wounded souls? Did they get any type of healing? And that's where I think, you know, what I'm trying to do, and I'm sure there's many people who try to do that and make a penetration into helping them understand that to solve the issues is not to expose them to, you know, make great TV or just for them to tell a story, but okay, let's go deep into helping them. Kind of like a psychologist would do, you know? You can be a spiritual psychologist, I guess, to a certain extent by basing your experiences. I've dealt with death, much death, addiction, abandonment, abuse, and I say to myself, I've healed from it. I've recovered. Life wasn't easy. But if I can do it, I know there's other people can. And if they have a struggle to realize how do they get there, well, I'm going to do the best I can to help them get there, or at least set them on that road to saying, hey, look, you're not crazy. We've all dealt with this. We all have a story to tell. We all have pain, sorrow, heartache. But the thing is, collectively, we can come together and find a solution. And let's not just self-medicate. Let's just wipe it right out. Let's see the lie. Let's decipher that lie and reconstruct our own path, because that's what it is. We want to rewrite our own narrative. And the only way to do that is to, unfortunately, go back to those events, freeze those frames, pull out whatever negative, but know that for every negative, there's a positive. And even though we might not want to see that movie replay again in our lives, there's always some sort of clue or evidence that maybe I should have done this. Maybe I could have done this to prevent that. You can't prevent the past, but you can definitely prevent the future by being aware and conscious of those surroundings. So I always say, stop, think, and listen to anything that you have to do, whether you're dealing with the paranormal or the unseen, and obviously the physical realm. If we can stop, think, and listen in everything, and listen to our voice, listen to our intuition, listen to the voice of the spirit.
Yeah.
I do believe that we can find a lot of healing.
That's fantastic. And your approach really feels unique and fresh. And I hear what you're saying. It is something that's necessary. Just to quickly mention, one of the programs that I was watching, there were these gentlemen that were living on this piece of land, and they were really tormented by the energy and oppressed. And they looked so sad and defeated. But that was the kind of the conclusion. And that was it. You know, they don't believe they'll ever sell this house. And I thought, well, what happens to them now? You know, we've been entertained by 15 minutes or whatever, hearing their story. But I love that this is what you're doing and helping people in this way. Joe, to wrap up the conversation,
Sure.
I'd like you to talk a bit about accents of emotion. I'm so excited about this project, and I can't wait to see it. So could you just tell us a bit about it, just to round things up?
Absolutely. So obviously, at the end of the day, and I do agree with you, you see these people wounded, and you're like, okay, so what ended up happening to them after? Where is that fallout? Accents of emotion is exactly where I'm trying to go with this whole soul concept. I believe if we can take, and this is how I say it, if everybody out there can know it, even yourself, you ever listen to a song, and maybe when you hear that song, it takes you to a place in your life that you know exactly what you were doing when you heard that song.
Yeah,
And sometimes, I know for me, when I used to wanna grieve, for, like, even when my father had passed away, you know, when I wanted to grieve, sometimes the best thing for me was to go to that song, listen to it, take the emotions out of it, and then I would just weep. And I needed music to do that. And being a musician, I guess I could always relate to music, you know, for that. But music is a vibration. It is an emotion. It is a frequency that we tap into. So for accents of emotion is to go back to that time of our life, whether it's through a song or through that still frame of that experience that we've had. Let's take that. Let's accent that emotion. Let's go and dissect it. Let's take that picture. You know, where it's like Where's Waldo? Let's take that scene from our memory and let's pull out all the negatives that led up to that and the positives. And let's write them down and let's revisit that. And even though we might not want to go to that negative part of that picture or that scene, we can take that negative, we can learn from that, and we can heal from it. And that way we don't repeat that same path, because if we don't go back to accenting those emotions, we're just going to wander the wilderness and just continually to circle back, and we're going to repeat those same things again. It's like somebody with a relationship. You know, why is it I go into a relationship, I'm going to be in love with this person for the rest of my life, and then the next thing you know, that doesn't work. Now you're into another relationship and you want to love them for the rest of your life. And it's like, why do I keep repeating those same things and wandering that wilderness? Because I believe we're not accenting those emotions enough. So accenting of emotions are going to speak on ways and exercises and things that we can do in this world, you know, physically and spiritually, whether it's through prayer, guidance, healing, and music, and reading scripture, whatever we need to do to accent those emotions, to bring you healing, to elevate you to where you need to be spiritually. So now you can bring your mind, your body, your spirit, everything together. You can become one with God. And that is my ultimate goal.
Fantastic. Well, like I say, I can't wait to see the film, to see the fruition of the project, and to see how everything comes together. Joe, there is so much more we could have spoken about. I'm just thinking about all the different things I could have asked you, but I'm going to wrap it up here. It's been wonderful talking to you. I cannot thank you enough for this spirited and lively and dynamic conversation. Joe Cetrone, thank you once again.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.